It was a normal Tuesday. People were buying bread. A dog was chained in a courtyard. A group of friends had just sat down to lunch, wine cups still full. None of them knew they had less than 24 hours left. By the next morning, their entire city would be gone, buried so completely that it would take almost 1700 years for anyone to find it again. This isn't a legend. This isn't exaggerated for effect. This actually happened, and the evidence is so well preserved that we can tell you what people were eating, what jokes were scratched onto their walls, and the exact expression frozen on their faces in the final moments. This is the story of the city that vanished overnight. In 79 AD, the Roman city of Pompeii sat quietly at the base of a mountain the locals barely thought about. Mount Vesuvius hadn't erupted in living memory. Generations had been born, lived, and died without ever seeing it do anything more dramatic than sit there, green and silent, on the horizon. People built vineyards on its slopes. They built homes at its base. Nobody in Pompeii considered it a threat because, as far as anyone alive could remember, it never had been one. That's the first uncomfortable truth of this story. The volcano wasn't hiding. It was right there, every single day, for the entire lives of everyone who died beneath it. On August 24th, in the early afternoon, Vesuvius erupted with a force that modern volcanologists compare to roughly 100,000 times. The energy of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Within hours, a column of ash and pumice shot more than 20 miles into the sky, then began raining back down over Pompeii, Herculaneum, and the surrounding towns. At first, it might have looked survivable. Ash and small stones falling from the sky, an inconvenience, maybe even mistaken for something strange but not immediately deadly. Some residents fled early and they lived, but many stayed. They sheltered indoors, waited it out, maybe grabbed a few belongings and figured they'd return once things settled down. This decision, an entirely reasonable one based on everything they'd ever experienced, cost them their lives. Roofs began collapsing under the weight of accumulating pumice, and then, in the early hours of the following morning, everything changed. The eruption column collapsed on itself, and the volcano unleashed what's called a pyroclastic flow, a superheated wave of gas, ash, and rock moving toward the city at speeds that could exceed 100 miles per hour, at temperatures hot enough to instantly kill anyone in its path. This is the part that separates Pompeii from almost every other ancient disaster we study. Death came fast, too fast to run, too fast to scream. Archaeological evidence suggests many victims died from thermal shock in a fraction of a second, their bodies preserved in the exact postures they held at the moment the flow arrived. And this brings us to the discovery that made Pompeii famous, the discovery that turned a buried city into one of the most emotionally devastating archaeological sites on Earth. When excavators in the 1800s began digging through the compacted ash layers, they kept finding strange hollow spaces in the hardened volcanic material. At first, no one understood what these voids represented. Then, an archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli had an idea. He poured liquid plaster into the cavities and waited for it to set. What emerged wasn't just a shape, it was a person. The ash had hardened around each body before decomposition, creating a perfect mold of the victim's final moment, and Fiorelli's plaster technique let us see, for the first time in 17 centuries, exactly how these people died. A mother curled protectively around her child, a dog still chained, twisted in agony, a group of people huddled together in a room, arms wrapped around each other in their final seconds. These aren't statues. These are casts of actual human beings, frozen in the instant everything ended. Here's what makes this story different from most ancient disasters. Pompeii wasn't destroyed. It was preserved. The very ash that killed its residents sealed the city in an airtight time capsule, protecting it from looting, weathering, and the slow decay that erases almost every other ancient site over centuries. When archaeologists finally uncovered Pompeii, they weren't finding ruins. They were finding a paused moment. Bread was still in ovens, carbonized but recognizable, loaves that had been baking when the eruption began. Political graffiti covered the walls, campaign slogans for local elections that would never happen. Bars still had wine stains on their counters. A guard dog's collar was found intact. In one house, archaeologists discovered a half-eaten meal still on the table. This is what makes Pompeii genuinely unsettling in a way most ancient history isn't. We don't just know facts about these people. We know the smallest, most mundane details of their final ordinary day. Historian Mary Beard, who has spent decades studying Roman life through the Pompeii excavations, has pointed out that the site gives us access to something almost no other ancient location can offer, not the polished official version of Roman history, but the real unfiltered texture of daily life, arguments, jokes, and all. And there's something else worth sitting with. Pompeii wasn't a small, forgotten village. At the time of the eruption, it was a thriving, mid-sized Roman city with an estimated population between 11,000 and 20,000 people. It had bathhouses, an amphitheatre, bakeries, brothels, wine bars, and a bustling forum. It was, by every measure available to its residents, a normal, functioning, permanent place. The kind of place you assume will still be there next year, and the year after that, because it always has been. This is the deeper unease underneath the Pompeii story. It's not really about volcanoes. It's about how confidently humans mistake normal for permanent. Nobody in Pompeii woke up that morning believing their city would cease to exist by nightfall. They had bills to collect, meals to cook, elections to campaign for. The volcano had been silent for their entire lives, so silence became evidence of safety, when really it was just the absence of the worst outcome so far. Think about how strange that psychological pattern is, and how familiar it still feels. Communities today build entire lives, economies, and futures on the assumption that today will resemble yesterday. Coastlines expand, cities grow along fault lines, populations settle beneath dormant volcanoes across the world, from Naples itself, which still sits in Vesuvius's shadow with millions of residents, to cities near active fault systems in California, Japan, and Indonesia. Geological time and human time operate on completely different scales, and that mismatch is exactly what killed Pompeii. The mountain wasn't asleep. It was simply operating on a calendar humans couldn't perceive. Here's the moment worth pausing on. Right now, somewhere in the world, there is very likely a city sitting quietly at the base of a volcano that hasn't erupted in centuries, its residents going about ordinary days, assuming, reasonably, based on everything they've ever witnessed, that tomorrow will look like today. That assumption isn't foolish. It's simply what humans do with the evidence available to them. Pompeii's residents weren't careless or ignorant. They were making the same reasonable bet almost every community throughout history makes, that the recent past predicts the near future. Most of the time, that bet pays off, just not always. The plaster casts still on display in Pompeii today aren't just artifacts. They're a warning frozen mid-sentence, a reminder that the line between an ordinary Tuesday and the end of everything can be thinner and quieter than anyone standing on it will ever realize. The city didn't vanish because of some ancient curse or unexplainable mystery. It vanished because a mountain that had been patient for centuries finally ran out of patience in a single afternoon, and 11,000 ordinary people doing ordinary things never saw it coming. Maybe that's the real lesson buried under all that ash. Permanence was never a promise. It was just a pattern nobody had seen broken yet.